America, the power structure would have you believe that Israel rules the world. America never left World War I. They have been in a continual state of war ever since the formation of the Federal Reserve. What we are witnessing today has been done time after time after time. It was a mafia, it was terrorism, 100 different operations since World War II, 100 times. That is who the CIA, that is who the deep state is. And it sits under military, and those military are public companies and controlled by the asset managers. This is a criminal network that is more powerful than government. People think Trump is like independent. No, these nodes which are now coming home, which no longer can be propped up. And that's the change that we're witnessing right now. Bitcoin is a boycott from the Federal Reserve, from BlackRock, from the banks. And that's why they don't want you to have Bitcoin in self-custody. They want you to own it through their ETF. Archie. America would have you believe, the power structure would have you believe that Israel rules the world. And there is a very elaborate conspiracy theory that says Jews rule the world. Based upon a narrative that was pushed during the Nazi regime. Now, by the way, we'll go back a bit and then we'll come back. Remind me if I get lost on this, try and bring me back to that question. The Federal Reserve was implemented in 1913. It was based upon the model that was implemented in the Bank of England. The Bank of England, 1694, was to fund both sides of the French and British War and take over the issuance of the pound through an elaborate debt-based Ponzi scheme, which made the foundation of the model. And so the Bank of England funded both sides, and you ended up with the Napoleon, which was a resistance against the central bankers, because he ended up funding the war through selling Louisiana to America because he didn't want to take on any debt. And you end up with this model that was perpetuated. We did all the colonial expeditions. We stole the tea from India in order to get all their gold. We did the Opium War in China in order to steal all of China's silver. We did the raping and pillaging of all the African countries, created the transatlantic slave trade, built our economy based upon that. How did we do it? We did it through currency debasement and inflation. We did it in America. What people talk about the Boston Tea Party, there were 3 central banks in America, and the Boston Tea Party, the revolution, was not just about the tax. It was about that we debased, that we actually printed their fake currency and flooded the economy through inflation in order to destroy the economy so we could take down the local banks. This has always been what we are witnessing today has been done time after time after time. So then in 1913, you get the installation of the Federal Reserve under very questionable things. You read the Creature from Jekyll Island if you want to understand, how that came to be. You have the Warburg family that were both the governor of the Federal Reserve and also the Reichsbank in Germany. In 1914, you have World War I. During World War I, Wall Street, via the nodes on this proof of weapon network from the Federal Reserve, which gave the ownership of this private bank to all the banks that could print the money every time you issue a loan, they end up firstly creating this debt-based Ponzi scheme within America, which I would call fake capitalism, that did exactly what it did to England. England had no debt. Then the Bank of England was formed, funded a war, and then you bankrupted it right up until World War I through all these colonial expeditions. The wealthy in the Dutch East India Company end up with all the gold and all the assets through mercantilism. So now you've got a bankrupted England, and they say the Bank of England is no longer useful to us. Let's stick all the gold in America. So let's create the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve then starts its scheme to take a country that had very low debt and turn it into $37 trillion that it is today. Ever since the Federal Reserve, in 1914, you had World War I. America never left World War I. They have been in a continual state of war ever since the formation of the Federal Reserve. Whether it be 100 different covert wars, whether it be the Cold War, whether it be the Korean War, the Vietnamese War, the fake war on terror, which they engineered, all of the Middle Eastern wars, all of the all of the African wars, all of the Latin American war, continual, never stop. What we are witnessing in Gaza has been done covertly without you seeing it on camera, time and time again. That Bank of England to today, there were studies done that estimate 200 million people have died from the Bank of England to today in continual state of wars. Now, what happened in 1914? You created fake capitalism in America based upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme. You also funded the Bolshevik Revolution, which overthrew the Russian Tsar and replaced it with the Soviet communist regime. And you also funded, through the Bank for International Settlements, Nazi Germany and fascism. If you look at the funding, it's absolutely fascinating. I recommend reading a book called Tower of Basel. And it goes through, and this is
Tower of Babel?
Basel.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And Tower of Babel is obviously, it comes from that, religious theological concept. And then they said Tower of Basel because the Swiss banks. Now, if you look at the history of the Bank for International Settlements, it was the bank that had no reserve, but was connected to the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve and the Swiss Central Bank. So you could store your gold at either the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, or the Swiss Central Bank. And the Bank for International Settlements was a ledger. And that ledger would say who the gold belongs to on a piece of paper in a drawer at one of those central banks. And so when Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia, the Bank for International Settlements would contact the Reichsbank and say, hey, this is now our gold. And they would take the gold in the drawer at the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve and change the label and say, this is now Hitler's gold. This is Germany's gold. And Hitler funded the war through National Socialism, which was a labor-backed currency. He arrested the Rothschilds. But the Bank for International Settlement would use the Reichsbank in order to reclassify the gold that would back this labor-backed currency. And so this was an expedition to accumulate as much gold as possible so that the Bank for International Settlement could trade the label on the drawer and change the private key. Germany ended up with all of this gold. You obviously had the Great Depression that led to, into World War II as well. That was the confiscation of all Americans' gold, at $35. You had the bankruptcy of the colonial expedition, and World War II was the mechanism for taking all of the gold from Britain and the colonial side, reset through currency, that all of that gold ended up at Fort Knox. Okay? So now you got all of Germany's gold at the end of World War II, or a chunk of it. You've got a big chunk of the Russian gold through communism. And you've got all the colonial mercantilism gold, and you've got the Federal Reserve fake capitalism. 75% of the world's gold ended up in Fort Knox. And what did America have? It created the manufacturing base to manufacture weapons of mass destruction using financial weapons of mass destruction. So they used finance in order to engineer creating all of those wars, selling all of the weapons, and then it took you into World War II. And what was the end of World War II? Right, we have 75% of all the gold. Everyone is bankrupt. We've just got the Soviet Union, which we funded. And so now we profit from capitalism, fascism, and communism. And we can fund every side. So what do? We fund the Cold War. And what is needed in order to build these financial weapons of mass destruction? Okay, so firstly, let's meet at Bretton Woods. And the first thing we need to do is persuade every single country that will sign up for this to have their currency no longer gold-backed, but convertible to the dollar. And then we've got all the gold in Fort Knox. So if ever you want, you can change your currency. You can buy dollars and then we'll give you some gold. And it created this eternal bid on the dollar. So everybody said, all right, yeah, fine. We can sell our currency. We can print our currency, sell our currency, buy dollars. And you know what? When we've got our dollars, we probably want some yield on it. And so what will we do? We'll lend it back to you. We'll buy some treasuries. And then America had this revolving bank account. They call it a dollar milkshake theory, where it would suck up the world's gold, inflate away everyone else's currencies, everyone else's savings. They would go through severe inflation. And then they would create an organization that could send financial weapons of mass destruction around the world, the World Bank and the IMF. So now you had the Bank for International Settlements, you had the IMF, you had the World Bank. What they did is they went to every country and destroyed their currency through currency manipulation, made them print their currency and buy treasuries. And if you didn't do it, we'll fund a colored revolution and overthrow your government and replace it with a government that's right for us. And once you are a government, you will buy our weapons. You must buy our weapons, and you must price all your goods in dollars. And if you don't do that, you're going and will blow up your country. It was a mafia, it was terrorism. And every good that you produce, you must produce in dollars. And by the way, when you have resources, you can't produce your own goods. You need to give us the resources, and we'll take all of this vast investment in our treasuries, and we'll build our own technical industrial complex, financial industrial complex, military industrial complex, consumption industrial complex. And we'll make you buy as many weapons, and if you don't buy them, we'll sanction you and destroy your economy. And then that will destroy the wealth of all the people, and then they can execute a colored revolution, a covert regime, 100 different operations since World War II. 100 times. And they pretend, oh, this is for religion. This is because we're civilizing the world. This is because we're, we care that you're a dictator and we want to replace it with democracy, even though they were replacing democracies with dictators in the case of Iran. And so they would fool the world into this scheme, but they had all the gold. And through this mechanism, you ended up with the military-industrial complex. Who were the military-industrial complex? It was companies that would take the Pentagon budgets and build the vast military and create GDP by just chucking out money from all these sucked-up dollars on a debt-based Ponzi scheme that would then build a manufacturing base and make sure that we don't get bombed, but we can bomb everyone else. Now we need continual war. So you have the Cold War. You say, well, capitalism versus communism. The communists are about to get us. We've got to get the commies. The commies are about to take over Afghanistan, which happens to have all the poppy seeds for all the drugs that the CIA needs. Who were the CIA? The CIA were, through Operation Paperclip, the Nazi Germans that came over and joined the CIA.
So just a little bit. After World War II, there was an operation to repatriate Nazi scientists who were among the leaders in the world in all sorts of fields to America, and they were given, I guess they were exonerated for their crimes if they actually came in and worked in America for the American military-industrial complex.
Exactly. Now, what did they pretend that the CIA was there for? They said it's for national security. No, the CIA was always for corporate interest and waging war for corporate profits from day one. There was a 10% that might be national security, but 90% was, if you want a company to get the resources that it needs, i.e. originally it was like the Banana Republic and the banana, trade in Central and South America, then we will exert a regime change through the CIA, and the negotiation will get you everything you want, and we'll put a puppet in charge, that gives us everything we want. And the CIA was a partnership between those Nazi scientists to build the military-industrial complex, and then they needed the security and the finance. The security was the Italian mafia, which was a faction of power in America at the time. And it was the Jewish mafia. Now, when I say that, there's this word Jewish that people suddenly think you're talking about all Jews and you're anti-Semitic. Just like I say Italian mafia, there is a group of Italians that were in the mafia, and there were 99% of Italians that weren't the mafia. So when I say Jewish mafia, there was a Jewish mafia as a faction of power in America.
When they called mobbing, I mean, this is well established and well documented. It's not a figment of someone's imagination. There did exist ethnic factions within the underworld and crime factions, and one of them was Italian. Obviously, another faction was Jewish as well in America.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you combine those all together and you have the CIA. Now they need money. What did they do? If you want to understand how they created the money laundering network that still exists today, they'll tell you that it doesn't. Read a book by Paul Williams called Operation Gladio. It was done through the Vatican Bank, the Italian mafia connection. And so the Vatican Bank was created a banking operation which would get 15% of all the revenue from the crimes that they were committing. And those crimes were human trafficking, weapons trafficking, drugs trafficking, and sex trafficking. And all of those were happening, and it created a black operation, a fund that existed outside Congress where you could commit crimes against humanity. And then they put nodes of this proof of weapons network all around the world. There's one in, Ukraine is one of them that separated Europe and Russia. Taiwan is another one that separated China and Western interest. Another one was South Korea during the Korean War that separated, Korea, North Korea, and other parts. And one of them was Israel. And so during World War I, when the UK and Winston Churchill were bankrupt and needed to fund World War I and transfer all the gold over to Fort Knox in America eventually, they took loans from the Zionists. And the Zionists in exchange said that we will give you a Jewish state in Palestine. We'll plonk you on top of Palestine. And that was our promise to you. And it was declared to Walt Rothschild. And so Walt Rothschild had that declaration. World War I ends in 1918. Then we have the Great Depression in between, confiscation of gold. Then we have World War II. Then we have the creation of the CIA, which was a replica of MI6. And the British intelligence from the British Empire. Then you have deals that were signed between the Zionists and the Nazi regime to take 60,000 German Jews and plonk them in Palestine. Now, immigrants were welcome at the time. Like there was, at that time, it was previously the Ottoman Empire, and then Britain, through its colonial expeditions, had occupation. And then we entered into this territory, and they basically just started pushing Jewish people, mainly from prior to fleeing the Holocaust and then after the Holocaust. And then they would commit terrorism all around the region so that all the Jewish people would believe that they're in fear and that they, from all their history and persecution. And when you joined Israel, which started on terrorism, Haganah, all of these groups, look them up on Wikipedia. They basically did all these false flag operations, covert operations, in order to make it look like the Egyptians did it, but it was them that did it, so that they could blame them, escalate the war, and all of these different things when you look at that moment in history. But essentially, they needed, America and the British Empire needed a destabilization force to prevent the Arab countries ever unifying in an Arab League around their oil, because then they could compete with the dollar. And they needed oil to be priced in dollars, and they needed an army. And so they weaponized religion. They radicalized the evangelical Christians in America to believe you needed to protect Israel, the country, and the political regime, rather than Israel, the prophet, in the scriptures. And then you had this crazy thing where all the Jews were so scared that they'd go to Israel and you had to join the IDF, and you'd have to engage in the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians for a minimum of 3 years. And so you built an army. And this is an army that is radicalized into believing they're in a fight for survival, and therefore they need to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. This is still raging on today, but Israel became a weapon for the military-industrial complex. If you wanted to commit crimes against humanity, you just get Israel to do it. Follow the money. People say Israel rules the world, right? This is a plausible deniability story. Israel is a tiny economy relative to America, okay? They print the Pentagon budget based upon a narrative. It's the war on terror. It's the Iranians. It's the Iraqis. They got weapons of mass destruction. They took down 9/11. They took down the towers. Whatever narrative they have to engineer, and they do engineer this, don't believe that they won't kill their own people. They will. It's the mafia. The mafia will do anything. That is who the CIA, that is who the deep state is. And it sits under military, and those military are public companies, and those public companies are tradable and controlled by the asset managers. BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Morgan Stanley, all those. Okay? So that's where you are. You have this deep state, and they can create wars. And that is the proof of weapons network. You have these nodes all around. And right now, all of this Palantir technology that's coming home through border security, it's already been beta tested on the West Bank. All of the injections, they were beta tested. All of the drugs, they were beta tested on Africans. This is a criminal network that has more powerful than government, that has budgets that sit outside any congressional or constitutional or democratic process, quote unquote democratic, and they run the shops. Governments, you can't be a president unless you bow down to this network. You're not allowed to play president. People think Trump is independent. No, you just have to look at his backers and what he's doing. Everything is building the technocratic nightmare. Doing the aggression in Israel, and he is good as work for the banks and the financial institutions. He's been a very good boy for them. He's given them as much money as they need. And it's because they're in charge. And that's the same with the UK. That's the same with Australia. That's the same with Canada. That's the same with the European Union. Where did the European Union come? It was created by the Bank for International Settlements. It was their project. It was to turn Germany get rid of all those competing currencies, consolidate it into the European Union, have unelected officials and a European central bank and a single currency, so that you could essentially use organizations that were created after the Cold War, during the Cold War, NATO, and NATO would be a sales strategy for the military-industrial complex. You can see it right now in Ukraine. Keir Starmer is just sending $3 billion every year to Ukraine. That goes to an installed politician called Zelensky that was installed in 2014 as a result of a CIA covert regime change. The USAID is funding the BBC and all of the media to push out this narrative. We're told that we're defending democracy. They print the money. They take their cut off the top, and then it goes straight back into printing GDP for American companies and pushing up the stock market. And that's what they need to do to keep turning it over. They're doing the same in Palestine. The only reason things are changing right now is because there was a rising power called China that created a network called BRICS that circumvented sanctions, that allowed for oil to be priced in alternative currencies, that was immune to sanctions, and partnered with the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, and said, we're your most important customer now. We're buying oil, most of your oil, because America's got its own oil and it's energy independent now. And so therefore, why don't we align BRICS with China, SCOs, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and all of the exporting countries, ASEAN, Taiwan, Vietnam, Vietnam, Cambodia, all of these different exporting countries. And why don't we create a resistance movement against the dollar, which was called de-dollarization? And whose idea, who supported this? BRICS. Goldman Sachs did. Goldman Sachs hosted in America, which is not an America First company. It is a global institution that said BRICS is a good idea. And so it created that resistance against it and said, how do we reset the world order now? I know, let's put Trump in and let's do tariffs. Tariffs reset the world order, consolidated power just like COVID. And I'm just going from beginning to end. I could give you a million stories in the middle, but we'd be here forever. But story after story after story is, in order to prop up the dollar, you need to create crimes against humanity to force people to print their currency, buy dollars, and lend it to the US government. Now, because of these regional blocks and because the Proof of Weapons Network has said, these people aren't even having children anymore. They don't even have good birth rates. There's no good demographics. The country's completely divided and polarized. Let's bring it home and let's invest over there. And when we want to change everything, we'll just price our ETFs in another currency. Maybe we'll accumulate a bunch of Bitcoin. And maybe the moment that we need to, the Federal Reserve can reset the world order, just like they've done many, many times. And so currencies are the financial weapons of mass destruction. And the dollar is a proof of weapons network. And there are these nodes which are now coming home, which no longer can be propped up. And that's the change that we're witnessing right now. And if you want to try and figure out how to invest through that and beat BlackRock and beat JP Morgan and beat Goldman Sachs, you ain't going to do it. You're going to give them your money, and then that's how they accumulate their power. And that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a boycott from the Federal Reserve by taking your money out of the system. It's a boycott from BlackRock by not getting them to own your Bitcoin. And it's a boycott from the banks by not having to take on debt, which is the engine of fiat currency. And then you can boycott them. You can boycott all these companies. You can spend local. You can look after your local farmers. You can spend from local trade routes. And that's what Bitcoin does. And that's why they don't want you to have Bitcoin in self-custody. They want you to own it through their ETF and borrow against it. And they'll engineer shitcoins, tokenization, and everything to try and get your Bitcoin.